category of drugs which I haven't covered so far are the anabolic steroids. Yes, you are probably thinking about elite athletes such as cyclists, swimmers, runners and Belarusian shot putters who want to gain extra strength, endurance and explosive starts in the 100-metre dash. However, they are also commonly abused by weightlifters and bodybuilders to build muscle mass and strength. And whilst they are banned from elite sport and there are heavy penalties for testing positive in sport, they are also readily available in many gyms in New Zealand focusing on bodybuilding and weightlifting. One of the very nasty side effects from anabolic steroids is roids rage, and this is displayed as bullying and aggression, which is very unsafe and unpleasant in the workplace environment. Now let's look at the drugs which we know a lot about. And I'm sure you are very familiar with cannabis and the fact that in New Zealand we are superb growers of marijuana or cannabis, both outside and inside. And this was a hydroponic seizure found in the basement of a student flat in Dunedin. Yes, a scarfy plantation. And we have so much dope around that we have hash oil labs throughout the country extracting the oil from cannabis and turning it into the sticky goo, which is a lot easier to distribute around the country. Up until the year 2000, Kiwis were mainly into slow-me-down depressant drugs. Alcohol, cannabis, and even in the 70s we had a lot of pure heroin being imported straight from the Golden Triangle area in northern Thailand. We called it the Mr. Asia era. And you may either recall the Mr. Asia era or have actually watched some of the TV underbelly programs which depicted how terrible that era was. But it was headed up by our Kiwis. Terry John Clark, Marty Johnson and others started the syndicate in New Zealand, then they took it to Australia and eventually to the UK, and many within the syndicate either got killed off or ended up being arrested in the UK and imprisoned. And I remember the era as I was the forensic analyst who analysed many of the samples that got intercepted by New Zealand Police and Customs, and I spent 18 months of a scary time of my life being protected as a police witness who had to stay alive long enough to give evidence in the Supreme Court trials once the syndicate got busted in New Zealand. Unfortunately, many key witnesses were not capable of turning up to those trials. The syndicate had rather nasty ways of getting rid of threats. Clearly I survived. The heroin dried up, leaving behind a bunch of addicts. And this is where Kiwi ingenuity comes to the fore. If we can't get something anymore, what do we do? And if you've answered, we make it ourselves, you are quite correct, because all over the country in the early 1980s, home-bake labs became established, and people purchased codeine from the chemist shops or burgle morphine preparations either from pharmacists or other outlets. They conduct some witchcraft-type chemistry in their kitchens or sheds and end up with a very impure mixture of codeine, morphine and heroin. And this in New Zealand is called home-bake heroin. We're really the only country in the world that bothers to home-bake to this extent. The new millennium arrived and Kiwis decided that they needed to be highly stimulated as well as depressed. And the gangs worked out how to accommodate that need and started to manufacture the very scary drug crystal methamphetamine. And that's what the rest of the world actually calls it. Crystal or ice. Not us. We have to be so different, so we call it P. For the most part though, our crystals in New Zealand are quite pure. And P because it is distributed in these cute little bags which are called pea bags or point bags, containing 0.1 of a gram, which is right about half a teaspoon, of crystals that might look a bit like sugar crystals. Now, how much do you think that people pay for their 0.1 of a gram of pea anywhere in New Zealand? If you have guessed approximately $100, you are correct. And not everybody becomes addicted immediately after their first exposure to pea. It is certainly a very addictive drug, and I don't want anybody to get the message wrong here, but some individuals do actually remain recreational users of this drug. And if somebody is a recreational user, 4 people could get pretty wired on this amount of pea and possibly even stay high for up to 24 hours. Many people do actually get dependent and addicted to pea very quickly, and then their habit can start costing them $1,000 a week, or even get so serious that it costs them $2,000 to $3,000 a day. So that becomes very expensive to manage. Pea is mainly smoked in these pea pipes, which are readily available at markets, alternative shops, some corner dairies, and over the internet. However, if the user hasn't got a pipe or it's broken, the old-fashioned light bulbs are perfectly adequate. Just take the filaments out, put crystals in the bottom, heat with a strong lighter and inhale the fumes. So if your light bulbs start disappearing from your houses, work sites or even vehicles, you really need to be concerned that something suspicious is going on. Unfortunately, mainline is happening more and more, injecting straight into the vein, and this is going to give the user a much bigger, faster rush. But consequently, this gear is often abandoned on roadsides, parks, beaches, places where our kids, my 4 grandkids, play, so we've got an environmental issue as well as a health issue. Pea is mainly made in these clean, tidy, high-quality controlled clandestine laboratories. I mean, wouldn't you love to work in this sort of environment? And I'm sure it would be no surprise to you that these guys often blow themselves up, gas themselves, and burn the place down. And this is what I used to get dressed up like when I used to dismantle these clandestine laboratories. It was a bit like going into a nuclear war zone. That's how toxicologically and chemically undesirable these clandestine laboratories are. Now, we need to be concerned about pea in New Zealand because Kiwis are now one of the highest users per capita in the world of crystal methamphetamine or pea, and that's pretty scary. But we also need to be concerned about ecstasy or E and the new designer drugs that are now replacing E, which are commonly called bath salts. Up until 2010, ecstasy was mainly purchased as cute little tablets with funny little logos on them, or sometimes as capsules. And these drugs would have contained one of the amphetamine drugs listed on these slides. Even then, they were different strengths and had varying stimulant and hallucinogenic effects. Around 2010, one of the ingredients for making these designer amphetamine drugs became difficult to obtain, so the designer chemists overseas and distributors of E had to urgently find a drug to replace E. And they turned to a drug called cathinone. Now, this is the natural component of the khat plant, K-H-A-T, which is grown in parts of Africa and Arabia. And those cultures chew on this leaf or brew it up, and they get a mild stimulant hallucinogenic buzz from this drug called cathinone. So what the designer chemists have done, they've grabbed hold of cathinone, they've played around it in their sophisticated laboratories, converting it to approximately 30 different derivatives of cathinones, and there are more of them being developed all the time. And there are at least 14 of these which have already been identified in New Zealand in various combinations which make up the drug class called bath salts. They cause high stimulation, hallucinogenic, extreme paranoia, sometimes violent combative behavior, rapid heartbeat, dilated pupils, mental confusion and irritability. And certainly there are already many of these in New Zealand, and as I said before, sometimes they are sold as ecstasy, sometimes as bath salts, sometimes as party pills, and they either come in crystalline form or they might come as capsules or even have been converted into tablets. We are also big users in New Zealand of party pills or herbal highs with no herb in them at all. And up until 2009, the main party pill which was around and had been since 2001 was BZP or benzylpiperazine. Millions of doses were sold in that form from local dairies, liquor outlets, dedicated party pill shops, bookshops even, and there was total disregard for the age of the purchaser. The government made BZP an illicit drug in 2008, but even when it was legal to buy, use, make, sell, it was not okay to be at work under the influence of this drug. The labs such as ESR were testing for BZP in workplace testing since 2001, and any person testing positive to BZP or any of the replacement legal party drugs would incur a positive strike which is treated the same as positive for an illicit substance. So when BZP was made illegal, it was rapidly replaced by other theoretically legal party drugs. One of these was DMAA, made from geranium oil extract, and this gave stimulatory properties. This was actually made into an illegal drug last April 2012. But another one that is still legal and can be purchased from many outlets all over New Zealand is a drug called salvia or Mexican tripping weed. And this is actually made from the salvia plant, which is grown in parts of South America, and it has hallucinogenic properties and very mind-altering properties, as well as being a depressant drug. And this one is still legal. Many people would not have escaped the seriousness of the synthetic THC market in New Zealand. For 18 months prior to September 2011, when the government classified most synthetic THCs as illicit drugs, it was being manufactured in Albany under the Kiwi brand called Chronic. And distributors and local dairies, as well as many other outlets, were selling these packets of Chronic to kids as young as 9, 10, 11, 12. Now, while synthetic THC acts on a similar part of the brain to THC, and THC is the drug component of cannabis, many of the after effects, side effects, and medium to long-term effects are even worse than being under the influence of cannabis and being a stoner. Originally, there were 2 derivatives of synthetic THC which were being distributed, but today there are over 30 different types of synthetic THC that are available not only overseas, but also readily available in New Zealand. And they've been often used recreationally by workers who think they can beat the drug test, but that is all changing. Now the final drug that I'm going to focus on is LSD or acid. And after the prevalence of this drug in the 60s, 70s, that is the hippie era, the flower power era, we didn't see much evidence of its presence in New Zealand in the 1990s. However, it is definitely back at rave scenes, party scenes, university campuses, so there is a resurgence of LSD. The way it is imported is in sheets of brightly coloured paper with pictures over the paper, and these are divided into small squares which are called tickets or tabs, and that represents 1 dose. So the user will pop a ticket or a tab under their tongue or straight into their eyeballs, and in no time at all they're hallucinating madly, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds away out there. And the other format is the microdot, with each dose being about the size of a big full stop. So that is an overview of the main drugs that are currently being abused in New Zealand. And now it's time to answer a few questions before moving on to Module 4.